And do we have, let's kick things off with a roll call.
How about I do that? Chair Clauda?
Present.
Assemblymember Rodriguez, Alyssa?
Here.
Jonathan?
Here.
Carla? Carla, you're on
here.
mute.
She must be muted.
Here. All right. I see her joining us, but I can't hear her. Jimmy? Don't see him. Lindy?
Here.
Tasha? Not here. Lindsay?
Here.
Okay. Caitlin? All right, Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right, excellent. Unless we have any changes to the agenda, I hope everyone's had a chance to look at it or has it accessible. But if everyone had a chance to look at it, I'd entertain a motion to approve, or unless anyone has any amendments to it.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second. This is Alyssa, second.
All right, unless there's any opposition, agenda is approved. Let's see. So the action items that we've got, the first one off is that we had this resolution regarding the CARES Act funding from our last one, and Lance has a drafted one that that Alyssa and I did have a chance to review, and so I think that action for this group is to read through this and decide if this is a resolution we would like to adopt. The main what it's mainly speaking to is the general approval of the framework that the Assembly developed for the CARES funding for the 156 million. It has had a few modifications to it since we met last. That framework itself, and I think up for consideration was adding some additional money to public safety salaries, and also putting 10 million into business relief. And business relief was one of the pieces of this that we said it'd be good to have additional money in childcare, business relief, and then and what was our third category? Workforce related, I think, workforce retraining. And so this resolution says it encourages if should more funding become available to go to those three areas: childcare, business assistance, and workforce. To go through the mechanics of approving this, Lance, what's the appropriate way? Should we do a voice vote or an email?
Go ahead. I think the appropriate way to do it, unless there's significant opposition, is to have some member of the BAC make a motion to approve, get a second, and then have some discussion. If you want to propose any amendments, work through the amendments. And then if you need to, you can vote on those amendments to include into the resolution. And then once that process is done, go back to the original motion, which is to approve the resolution. So first thing you need to do is make a motion to approve this resolution with a second, and then follow with any discussions or changes you'd like to have. Thank you.
You know, I might be on my end, but you cut off for part of that. But you said make a motion to approve it, and then going through a process of amending or revising?
That is correct.
Okay. Sure. Is there a motion to approve? And this did come in an email from Lance. I think it was yesterday,
right,
at 3 o'clock. So
yeah, I had some revisions to it, so apologize for the little bit of the tardiness. I will say that I really tried to capture the points that you talked about in August, and then some of the key points that you brought up in September about timeliness, and if we had other resources to put them towards small businesses. I think both Carla and particularly Carla had a really good point about making sure that whatever dollars we make available, we get them out there, make this process simple. So anyway, I tried to encapsulate that comment as well. I mean, I think Lindsay made an excellent point, which is, we might be a little bit late on where the money gets allocated, but I think the Assembly still sees that if they have an opportunity to make changes where programs don't get done or there's a reallocation of funds, the Assembly was interested to know, if that were the case, where would you reallocate those? And I tried to illustrate the intentions of the BAC primarily towards small business, but that was what I tried to encapsulate. So and families, I believe, and so if that's not correct, then please advise. Thank you.
Right. Right.
So I did take a look at this, and I agree that you encapsulated at least my comments and in this draft. So I would make the motion to approve.
Great. Is there a second?
Who was that?
That was
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Is there a second?
This is Alyssa. I second.
Okay. Let's see. So opposition. Any? Do we need to do a full vote, Lance?
Well, I would suggest, are there other members of the committee that have any suggested changes or edits or proposed amendments?
Oh, right. Okay.
This is Carla. I'd like discussion. I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand. Let me see. I just pulled off mute before you guys went on.
Go ahead, Carla. What would you like to add?
So, Lance, thank you so much for helping us put this together. I love that you tried to get all of our points of view in here. But in the end, seems to be as usual with me, I cannot support this this resolution. I think we all know the Assembly will do what the Assembly wants to do. But in the end, this CARES Act, I think, should be more of supporting businesses that would help support the community and put people back to work and things like that, and less about what the Assembly has aligned for how they want to use this CARES Act money. So I just want to say that even though I know that I will probably be outvoted, I want to say that I really oppose the way the Assembly has put together how they want to use this CARES Act money. And I won't be able to support that.
Was there a specific different allocation that you wanted to see, Carla?
Well, I hate to say that I have not been up on what's been going on locally lately. I've been focusing a lot on federal for some reason, probably because of the election. But the last I had heard, they were still putting a good chunk of money towards buying public buildings for housing displaced residents. Is that correct?
They are going to use they do plan to use a portion of it for the buildings. Yes, not the treatment center. I think the Alaska Club, and then a couple of the hotels, they were going to use some of these CARES Act funds to purchase them, I believe. Yeah, it's correct, Carla.
Right. And so here you've got a pandemic. We don't know when it will end. You're going to have, I fear every day the mayor will shut the city down again to try to minimize the amount of exposures for people, which I don't blame him if that's what he wants to do. I think he's trying to do what's best for the residents, but in the end, I think this money is going to be needed to keep people from being homeless, as opposed to housing and buying buildings that have to be maintained after the fact, which is another chunk of money. So I really feel that this money should be used for what I feel it was intended for, and that is to get people through this pandemic and not to take people who were houseless before pandemic and provide. I mean, that sounds cruel. I don't mean it to, but I think you're going to have a lot more on your hands in the next coming months if we don't do something to keep people employed.
Sure. Yep. Thank you, Carla. What are there other comments from BAC members? I do have one, and maybe it might require a little clarification from Lance. So one of the big things, one of the big changes that happened, I think, last week was the decision to move 10 million to business relief specifically. And actually, was that something that was enacted by the Assembly, or was it only proposed? Lance, do you know if that's already been done?
I don't think it's been done. I think it's up for the Assembly for final approval next Tuesday.
Okay, so it's for next Tuesday. Okay, so it was introduced it was introduced this Tuesday, and then it's going to be voted on next Tuesday.
I think I don't remember the days, Nolan, specifically, but I do know that the Assembly will be taking the matter up. It's either as a first reading of consideration or final action. But yeah, there's been a lot of interest to support local businesses more than was in the previous allocation. And so I think that the Assembly is going to be looking at a proposal to put 10 million more. And I think, in my opinion, I think Carla's points to not necessarily how the allocation is going to be or where the allocation is going to be done, but the importance of doing the allocation if we're going to put any money towards small businesses or families, or what we're going to do to make sure that people don't become homeless, make sure that the rules are simple, make sure that the money gets to them. There was a lot of make sure that it's not arduous or restrictive or bureaucratic. Just make sure that the process is simple to understand, because particularly small businesses have a lot going on in their world, and if they have the opportunity to receive some funds, make it simple. And I said all of that in a few words here. So yeah. I'm hoping that the Assembly gets that point too. So anyway,
sure.
I'll add that.
I've got a comment from or question or comment from Jonathan.
Yeah, hi. Carla's words really resonate with me on a lot of levels. But I also feel this torn, right? Is that this is a big chunk of money. It's an opportunity to do something transformative. And that just doesn't come along every day. And I don't have any solution. I'm just expressing that, I see the need in the business community. I think that the CARES Act funding was meant more broadly than just the business community, and the business community has had a number of programs, some of which were poorly executed, particularly at the state level, that they could access that just other people just can't get access to. And so I just want to express that I feel torn in this moment, because I think Carla's exactly right. The Assembly's going to do what the Assembly wants to do. They've decided that they want to do something transformative. But the fact of the matter is that, there is a relatively small portion here that's dedicated to businesses. I'm not advocating for a chain. I'm just sort of building the administrative record, I guess, that all these points are valid, and that it's a struggle to nail it right. And so I think in some ways the right in this case is getting the money out the door, and not the distribution. Like you can do this many different ways, and reasonable people can disagree on it. So I'm gonna stop there and just say that if I had my camera on, you'd see me slumped at my desk, sort of rubbing my forehead. So that's it.
All right, Jonathan's slumping and rubbing of forehead is officially in the record. Thank you, Jonathan. So one thing that I'm kind of thinking about is that I did hear from Suzanne LaFrance a couple days ago about the 10 million for business relief, and she did seem pretty eager and interested in BAC's viewpoint on that. And so I'm wondering if maybe if maybe there's if it makes sense to tweak the language here a little bit to specifically address whether we approve, if we approve of that decision to move 10 million to business relief. I personally feel that it's probably the right decision to make. And it was one of the three categories that we thought were good targets for new investment. But I'm wondering if we should maybe say more explicitly in our resolution that that's a move that we support or not. Because I think that's one thing that we've heard from the Assembly is they want to hear our specific thoughts on what's in front of them for a vote.
So I would suggest that if that is what you want to do, you could do another now therefore be it resolved afterwards, and just say the BAC is aware the Assembly is considering an additional $10 million to support small businesses, and either recommends or encourages Assembly approval for additional funds to small businesses. You can add that right there if you want. I asked Lila to bring up the Word version in the event you wanted to make edits. We'll just make them right here, right now. If that's something we can put it so you guys can see what it looks like. And then if you don't like that, but maybe to start with, Mr. Chairman, is that something that the rest of the BAC would like to do before we put it in there?
Yeah, open for discussion. Others to weigh in on that. 10 million for business relief. The original amount in the program was 5 million or something in that kind of neighborhood. I want to say, I might have that wrong. I don't have it in front of me, but I personally had advocated for a bit more. But Carla, is your hand up? Is that did you want to add something?
I was wondering if any of us know. So we saw the distribution of the funds. Where was the 10 million pulled from? Do we know how the allocation changed?
You know, Carla, I don't. I don't know. That is why I tried to be. Can you go up a little bit? So in the whereas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right there. I don't, since I didn't know specifically, I suggested that it's either going to come from the contingency funds. As you remember, I think there was left roughly $15 million in contingency, or there may be some current programs allocated for activities that they're not going to be able to use at all, or if they get additional funds. Obviously, the additional funds are not an option today, but my guess is it's probably going to come from the contingency or from the allocated programs that aren't able to use it. That's what I know, Carla.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I support the additional 10 for small businesses.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Oh, and Lindy, I think you wanted to comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm actually helping administer some of the small business grants right now with Coconut Lending Center. And so just kind of like some inside perspective, we were oversubscribed like immediately and then had to go to the lottery system. But I believe with this 10 million additional funds to the program, that it would cover our wait list, and we could even lower restrictions. There's a lot of verification documents, so maybe franchises could be included as well. So I'm super in support of it. It's been really hard having to tell people, I'm so sorry, like you are eligible for this thing, but we don't have enough money to fund you right now. So if another business becomes ineligible, then potentially you could get it. So I'm 100% in support.
Thank you, Lindy, I appreciate that comment and that perspective a lot. I would add to that too that the main relief programs that have been out there, the Paycheck Protection Program, it's over with. It's done. It's not available anymore. That was the forgivable loans. The AK Cares funding, the state level program, it was also oversubscribed and it's depleted now too. So there actually really aren't many pools of money out there for relief. There's some loan type offerings, but not the type of grant support that we're talking about here. And I believe it's still necessary. Who else wants to speak to this? Anyone else?
This is Alyssa. I just want to offer my support for that changes as well. I think all of you brought up really great points. So just full support behind it.
Cool. Thank you, Alyssa. And also, I think I wanted to mention on the for the record too. Lindsay hopped off and said she'd be back, and Jimmy Miner also joined us too. So, so we've got a couple changes. Let's see. Is there anyone else that wants to speak to this, or is this something we're ready to put to an approval vote?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to need some words. Maybe you could help Lila and I capture the essence of what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, okay, let's see. The Budget Advisory Commission supports the allocation of CARES Act funds up to 10 million in support of small business relief grants. Is it
Mr. Chair, I would like to possibly change that wording to of 10 million rather than up to 10 million.
and then we probably need a purpose there in order to or to support, you know, the to assist businesses in transitioning through a difficult economy.
Hey Nolan, this is Alyssa.
Go ahead.
Do we want to specify that it has to be grants, or do we want to leave it open to just small business relief in whatever form that might take?
Maybe relief is a better term.
This is Carla. I agree with you 100%, Alyssa, because I have seen a few businesses take that money and remodel and stuff like that. I felt like they really didn't need it. So I think if the assembly or somebody else figures out a better way to allocate the money rather than a grant, that should be open for that.
I will say that remodeling does inject money into the economy, although it may not be within the spirit of what the issuers of the money originally intended.
Agreed.
So, said with a
sometimes
smile.
remodeling is necessary for social distancing too.
Well, not the ones I saw, but I agree with you. But I do like the fact that if we leave it open for small business relief, that it can be something more creative too.
And I do know one of the from a language standpoint, some of the language that spoke to the assembly members was about supporting businesses not necessarily being largely for the sake of them being able to continue employing people. So it might be worth a nod to that. 10 million in support of small business relief to assist businesses and their employees in this difficult economy, or something like that. Yeah, I think something.
Can we live with that?
I think so. Does anyone else want to weigh in?
Actually, Nolan, I like that you decided to change that wording, because if another relief package comes from the federal government that pays employees to stay home, again, like it did before, the $600 a week, you're going to see a mass exodus from people working. And so I think if there's some way for us to maybe supplement or help employees out for staying at their jobs, or reward them for staying at their jobs, that's a good thing too. I don't know how it could be done, but you know what I'm talking about.
Sure. And I say this anytime it comes up, but the supplemental unemployment insurance, you know, was there's been some analysis and study of that, and it has not been shown to discourage employment or job seeking, and so I do generally I know that anecdotally everybody knows somebody who's been in that situation, and it's probably, you know, true in some cases, but overall the research that's been done on that hasn't shown that to be true. It's actually been a net loss for a lot of businesses, because that extra $600 a week was getting spent locally with local businesses, and now it's not. And so I have seen business advocates shoot themselves in the foot, quite frankly, in supporting getting rid of that. But that's probably outside of this resolution. What else? Is this any other comments before we vote to approve? Okay, hearing none. Do we need to do how do we do the vote, Lance?
So it seems to be, we put it in there. I'm going to assume there's, Mr. Chairman, there's no objection to the additional now therefore, correct? Commission members?
Yeah, because technically we would have to vote on that, right?
Yes, correctly, as there, you're exactly right, Carla. So I would have someone make a motion to add that now therefore, and then get a second, and then get approval, and then go back to the main motion with the amended. So a motion to include this addition, please. That's what I need.
Motion to include.
Is that Carla?
That's Carla.
Thank you.
Second from Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, now the main motion back to the commission. If there's no objections, so then the resolution would then get passed without objection. So I'll let you lead it, Nolan.
Okay. So no objections on the on that amendment. We're approving of the overall resolution now, Lance.
Correct, with the amendments.
So with the amendments, vote to approve the resolution. Is there any opposition?
This is Carla. Even though I really appreciate all the changes, I still must have opposition to this resolution.
One vote of no. Any others? Then I believe the resolution passes with one opposing vote.
Okay. And can I, just for clarity for me, since I have commission members jumping off, just for the record, so I have Nolan as a yes, Alyssa as a yes, Lindsay is out, Lindy as a yes, Jonathan as a yes, Carla as a no, Jimmy Minor, did you join us? Did you?
Yeah, I joined.
Yes.
I voting yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Just so to have it on the record. So the majority rules, it passes. Nolan, we will send this to you. If you could sign and date it, then I will get it to the assembly, please.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll ask Lila to send it to you afterwards, and then after Nolan signs it, we'll send it to all of the committee members.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Then with that being addressed, the next item on our agenda is assembly report, but I don't believe we have anyone from the assembly that can speak on their behalf. Is there anything that you wanted to say about assembly actions, Lance?
I think the only thing I want to mention is that the budget will be before the assembly for introduction next week, and then they are also looking at the documentation for the final distribution and use of the sale proceeds from MLMP sales. So they're looking at that document. I think they're acting on that on Tuesday. It got introduced again. They have the requirement as by the voters, they're paying off debt, they're putting money into the trust. I think that's as it relates to budget issues. That's probably the only other thing that that I'm aware of outside the operating and capital budgets. Desiree may have something to add from the assembly office, but that is all that I know.
Desiree, did you want to add something?
I don't really have anything to add. I think the assembly is just looking forward to the budget presentations in the upcoming weeks, and we'll see what amendments they're going to try to work into everything. And I'm just really curious about how things are going to pan out in the next while.
Excellent, aren't we all?
Thank you.
With that, let's see. Is there anything else on assembly, or any questions or comments from anyone else? If not, we can move on. All right, then next up is school district, and I think we've got Mr. Ratliff here with us.
Thank you. I'll keep my update brief. Star had to jump off. I guess she had to go something else. She was going to give a brief update on the school opening plan. You may have heard Dr. Bishop give her update a couple of days ago, just saying that we would delay opening school from our already delayed start of 10/19 somewhere past that, and she would give an announcement on October 15th of when that opening might be. I'm not exactly sure, what she's going to come out and say, but it's going to be sometime past the 10/19 start date that they had originally proposed. From the finance side, we're currently preparing our CAFR for FY20. It's almost done to the auditors. We're pulling a bunch of samples, so we should have that completed within the next 3 or 4 weeks, hopefully, and our audit finished. And then we're currently, our FY21 budget, as you know, we're down about 5,000 students in our neighborhood schools and up about 1,500 in our correspondence schools, and a lot of our intensive needs students have withdrawn. So again, we're still about a $15 million net loss for all of those, and having to shift another 10 or so over to the correspondence schools. Right now, we're just trying to project out our costs for the remainder of the year. Predominantly, we're going to see some savings in unfilled positions and some substitutes, a little bit in utilities, but once school starts back, we don't really know what that's going to look like, particularly with the substitutes of how many people aren't going to be coming back to work, or they don't feel safe coming back to the schools. So we're just really kind of waiting and seeing on that and hoping it all turns out okay. And then the other thing we're looking at now is starting our budget preparation for FY22 for next year, and kind of get a handle on what's going to be included in that. As we dropped those 5,000 students, we don't know how many of those are going to come back. So really just trying to get a handle on our ADM projections and then get our staffing done accordingly is going to be a tricky part. And, at this point, I think we're just hoping to get it relatively close. So, there's a lot of uncertainty that goes along with our next year budget prep and what our student count's going to be. Aside from that, that's really the only update I have, and certainly open to any questions.
I've got one. I've got one actually for you, Andy. So why the special needs count being down, is that largely driven by just the difficulties of distance education, or parents not being interested in that, looking for an alternative?
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of things driving it. One is our ability to actually test new students, because most of that requires face-to-face. So we've been trying to do some of it, but it's a lot more limited than what it used to. So the process is considerably, and not as many students being identified that are incoming, particularly in preschools. The second part of it is we did have, I think, around 140 students or intensive needs students withdraw. I'm not exactly sure where they went, whether they're in homeschool programs or private schools, but we did see kind of an uptick in the number of withdrawals for our intensive needs, which is also causing it. So right now, I think we're down, I want to say, 160 or 170 students from what we had projected in our original budget, which 100 students for us is about, or 100 intensive needs students is about $9.5 million in state and local funding.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Andy? Okay, hearing none, then with that, thanks for the update, and we can move on to Lance's presentation from OMB about the 2020 budget status and the 2021 budget.
Yeah. So I think for the 2020 budget status, we do a monthly report, and I have the monthly report as a budget to actuals for August. And at the end of August, this is a report that as soon as we are going to send it to the assembly for their consideration, I will send it to you. In the past, I don't think that I have sent these monthly reports. They are available to the public. If you would like me to, they're pretty short. They're only like 4 or 5 pages, and they summarize which departments are more or less than 5% of the trend at a point in time. If there are reports that you'd like to see, I can, what I'll do is I can send you the August report when I get it to the assembly, and then if in the future you want to continue to receive them, great. If not, then we don't need to do that. But I hadn't thought about that. If it might be of interest to you, let me know. I'll send it to you, and then if you want to continue them, just let me know. But I will say that at the end of August, we were about 67% through the year, and the percent of the budget actually spent was 56%, so almost 10% less. But then when we consider the amount that they've sort of encumbered or set aside, they plan to spend, the amount that they've spent and the amount that they've set aside for encumbrances, and this is labor and non-labor, it's at about 61%. So they are underspent at this point in time. There's a couple big pieces that I don't know if are included in here. Typically this time of the year, there is a significant amount of leave cash in that is required because people are only allowed to keep so much on the books, particularly from the fire department. And a leave cash in from the fire department can be somewhere between 1.7 and $2 million. For the total. We do budget for that, so these numbers might not reflect that cash in as of August because normally they have to do it in September, so it'll be a change. When you divide the labor and the non-labor, we're basically at about the labor is about 2 weeks behind, so the labor is about 64% spent, and then the non-labor, the spent and encumbered, is about 58. So the long story, or the short story is that overall we are underspending our projected budget. So all the funds considered, I do know that I expect the police department to probably run a little bit hot this year. They had a little bit of overtime earlier in the year. Even if it's covered by CARES Act funds in some manner, or FEMA funds due to COVID, we can account for that. Fire department's looking pretty good. I think the fire department's going to be very close, but everyone else seems to be underspending. We do not know what it will look like to the end of the year, but right now, with a few exceptions, everyone seems to be doing pretty good. So that's my report on the budget to actuals or for that. And Desiree, for your benefit, that I've asked Mr. Falsey to add it into the addendum to the agenda. And so that will be as an information item to the assembly for Tuesday night. All right. Unless there's questions, I'm going to go ahead and ask Lila to bring up a presentation for an overview of the Budget Advisory Commission. So this presentation is titled the presentation for tomorrow that I want to give to the assembly, and it looks a lot like what I've presented in the past, and I think all of the BAC members have, after seeing this for the first time and maybe not having an opportunity to take a look at the link that we sent you to let you know the budget was available, I can share sort of a high-level overview, but I also would appreciate your thoughts at the end. If there are pieces that I could do to make this more valuable to the assembly, I've learned a little bit from the BAC in the past to, what does that mean? Or don't forget to say something about that. And or if there's interest that you guys are aware of in the community, maybe I can make it a little bit better for them. So this is I would say, a final draft. And what I'm going to do is this presentation, while we have 2 hours with the assembly tomorrow, I believe we start at, I can't remember, 1 o'clock. I think it's 1 to 3. I don't have the agenda in front of me. I should know off the top of my head. But we have a couple hours. We won't need it. But what I'm going to do here is give a high-level overview of the general government operating budget, sort of where the revenues are standing, where our priorities are, and then at the end, summarize where, at least at this point in time, what the effects will be on the tax cap, what effect it will be on property owners, and how those things will change. We'll also include a page or two about the capital budget. I'll talk a little bit about those, and then summarize with the utilities and operating. So I think it'll probably take a little bit of time here. So go ahead, Lila. I'm going to ask Lila to control it for the presentation. So suffice it to say, building a budget during the COVID pandemic has been, it's been a little different. Projections, particularly on the revenue side, while we have trends from the past and we have a lot of information about how places are doing right now, I think on the revenue side, it's the most challenging portion of what we are doing. But I will say, what we are doing is, the municipality is doing everything possible to make sure that we are being responsive to the pandemic and the measures that are being taken, whether they're particularly on a budget side, the allocation of the CARES funds, the way in which we are operating our businesses remotely, whatever it would be for 2021, for 2020 and for 2021, we are really taking stock in that. And communities all across the country are dealing with it differently. Some of them are, they're just taking different measures on how they do it. And there's really no right or wrong way to proceed. It's just that as long as you're making sense about why you're doing what you're doing and explaining it. So I think building this budget, knowing or projecting how we're going to end 2020 and then how we're going to move forward in 21, I think we've got really good information to this point. The information will obviously change, but I think it's a solid proposal. The other thing that's we also recognize is that we are going to continue to get some declining in revenue sharing, and I'll point to this in a little bit. Revenue sharing over the last 5 years has gone from basically $20 million to $400,000. That is our expected. We budgeted a little more than $4 million this year. We were not able to receive some of that this year. Next year, we expect, we budgeted that we would get maybe $2 million. And if, depending on how the legislature acts, we'll make some adjustments in first quarter. The state grants supporting our projects and programs, while they remain relatively steady, they are probably more shaky than they have been in the past. The health department is particularly concerned about how some of the state grants that support some of their programs might be in jeopardy. But right now, we are assuming that the state grants amounts and levels that we are receiving, and that's primarily in the health, a little bit in the traffic department, those things are going to remain relatively constant. And then I think the last part is we built a budget that it's basically flat. The amount of change from 20 to 21 overall is in services. There's really no significant changes in general government. There are some additions which I'll point to that relate to the alcohol tax, because those services can be provided above and beyond what we have in 2020. So really, when you look at this particular budget and the total amount to the 2021 proposed, it's generally flat. Overall, it's less than a 1% increase overall from 20 to 21. The revenue sources are changing in 21, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, Isla. So the way we build a budget is, while we do continuation, the first thing we do is we look at how we project to end 2020 and where those dollars might be ending up, and how, if we have any of that fund balance, do we have any dollars that we might be able to apply to either close a gap in 2020 or fill a need in 21. What we are doing in this projection, I just talked about how we're doing in budget to actuals. In our fund balance projections, these are the things that we do know. We do know that our, and I'll have another slide here to talk a little bit about the details, but overall, in all of the revenues, all across all categories. Uh-oh, got an echo.
A little bit of feedback there.
Does somebody change how they're listening?
I think it might be that there's a phone, somebody who called in maybe needs to mute their line, I think.
Could we have, if someone is calling in, could they please mute? Thank you. It looks like it got done.
Yeah, we're good.
So revenues for 2020, obviously the room tax, the revenue sharing, reductions in the amount of fees. The assembly is, we've reduced permit fees. We've eliminated some permit fees in order to sort of induce development and get some things moving. So overall, the overall revenues for 2020 in the fund balance projections about $24 million down. The other thing that we do, while it shows as a negative, our debt service is down, which means that's less debt service, which means that's a good thing. Less debt is a good thing, so that's a positive. I mentioned that, with the sale of MLMP, there's really sort of two kinds of revenues that are coming out of the sale of MLMP. One is the proceeds in which we will receive from Chugach Electric to pay the debt and put into the trust. MLMP also has a small cash reserve that amount of cash will come to the municipality. And that's outlined in the assembly documents. But one of the things, there are a variety of purposes of those things. We're paying off obligations that are not related to the debt and not related to the trust. The administration is proposing that of that cash, we put $6 million of cash, of the MLMP cash, into our fund balance. And we then, we also, with the CARES Act funds, we are going to, with the Assembly's approval, with CARES Act funds, we have taken roughly $21 million of CARES Act. And with the Treasury guidance, we are going to apply $21 million of CARES Act funds to first responder payroll. And when we do that, we free up those revenues that we had for first responder payroll. That then rolls into our fund balance. We are going to take advantage of that to sort of shore up all of those revenue losses that we have in the beginning. The other thing is, so that's where the fund balance projection comes together. If you were to do the math at the bottom, it nets to about a positive $8 million. And that is in the assembly documentation we gave to them. So again, when we look at all of the revenues for 2020, how are we going to end? This is the projection that we're using. Lila? So that's how we think we're going to end 2020, roughly about $8 million to the positive, roughly. So now when we talk to Treasury and we look at all of the things that might be influencing or decisions that we've made on how they could influence our future going out, we have basically non-tax revenues. So these are things like, are we going to get contributions from the trust? So in this case, contributions from the trust are going, and this is a net number, non-tax revenues, contributions, we are going to get more money into the trust, but we're also going to lose some money from some of the utilities. We're going to lose a dividend. Ambulance fees are coming down. We also know that while we were supposed to get some federal reimbursement for ambulance fees, we're not getting them. And if we do, we're not going to probably get the $3 million that we thought. So we went and scrubbed all of those changes. The amount of money that we're going to get from the state from traffic control or court fine fees, our investment income is going to be a little bit down. And the building service safety area with the permit fees reductions that we're making and all of those non-tax revenues collectively put a $10 million deficit in our revenues going forward. So we have to take that into account. And then we have non-property tax revenues, and they come in two places. There are non-property tax revenues that are outside the cap, like the room tax, and then we have non-property tax revenues that are inside the cap. So outside the cap, probably the biggest one is the loss of the revenues. That's roughly $9+ million of that 10 is lost revenues outside the cap. The other little bit is some changes in the exemptions, the property tax exemptions that the property appraisals were looking at. So they don't anticipate that we will receive some of those, but 90% of that $10 million is the loss in the tax revenue, but it's not a property tax, and that's the room, and that's outside. So that's a $10 million loss there. We also have inside the cap, when we do the tax cap calculation, the way it works is we have a category of 6 or 7 activities that when those things go down, property taxes then fill the void. The first thing we do is to look to see if those those non-property taxes inside the cap, what are they doing? Well, in that world, the one shining star is that marijuana is the only tax inside the tax cap that we think is going to go up. The tobacco right now is going down. We don't know how it's going to look next year. We're going to assume that it's basically going to be flat. The aircraft tax will be flat. Motor fuel is generally going to be flat. But the one that's going to be significantly down is the motor vehicle rental tax. And that is in concert with the room tax. Room tax is outside the cap, and the motor vehicle rental is inside the cap. So there's some other changes inside the cap, but then the net effect is at the end of the day, the total amount of property taxes that are going to change will be an increase of 8.4 million. Now, of that 8.4, that includes all of the service areas. Later in the presentation, I'm really going to focus on the property taxes in the 5 major funds, which is what the Assembly is interested in. But if you look at the total amount of property taxes to be collected, roughly 7.8 of that is inside basic police, fire, roads, parks, area-wide. There's another little more than $500,000 where property taxes are going to go up in the Chugiak Eagle River service areas, on the hillside service areas. And in those service areas, they self-select to increase that. So the net effect is about somewhere between a 2.7 and a 2.9% increase in total property taxes. Again, those in the service areas, we don't control. If they want to raise them, we include them, but the net effect is 8.4. Okay, go ahead, Lila. So again, I talked about some of the key changes. I'll just use this slide to reiterate that. The trust is going to go up with the contributions into the MOA trust fund with the MLMP proceeds. We're going to gain about 4.6 million. Room tax is going to be down. Those contributions from other funds is about $5 million down. Revenue sharing, all of those things that I talked about. Investment income is kind of a wild swing. Permit fees, building permits. Again, that's not a reflection of low activity. That's a reflection of us lowering the fees. And then again, some exemption reviews. So that's sort of our revenue picture. So we are, with the challenge of how we're going to end 20, how we think we're going to move forward, the total there is, we got a challenge ahead of us. Now, when we build a commitment budget, the thing that we have to do, the thing that we do first is we build a continuation. We look at our current cost of salaries and benefits, and then we have some contractual obligations that we have to do. If we have any commitments to PERS or any changes in the benefits package that we might be offering, and we really kind of don't. We actually expect our health costs to be a minimal increase next year. But collectively, the labor, the salary portion of that, it's roughly about $4.5 million. The rest of it is in some version of contributions to PERS or medical and health benefits. So we have to make those obligations. So that is a commitment we have to meet. I will say that what you'll see in department budgets and what they will see is the administration on the labor and the salaries. They have made a proposal that for executives and non-representatives all across the municipality, including the utilities, they will remain flat. There is not a contractual obligation to provide any increases to execs or non-representatives. And in the proposed for this budget, the mayor is proposing that those things do not get increased in 2021. So for the non-labor, we have things like contracts or leases or professional services. The net of all of that is going to go down a little bit. Some departments are going to go up, but our non-labor expenses are going to go down. In 2021, while 2020 we thought it's going to go down a little bit, which is a positive for the debt. In 2021, collectively, we expect our debt service payments to be up about $200,000, which isn't much. The other thing in the budget is we have done some transfers. And so there will be some changes. A couple of the key changes are we are going to move for 2021, we're going to move payroll, which is currently in HR, out of payroll, and we're going to move it into IT. The reason we're going to do that in 2021, a lot of the payroll improvements that are continuing to be made are related to technology issues, related to how we move payroll and improve it. So they've been helping HR do that for 21. We're going to put those things there. A couple other little changes we're going to make right now. The cemetery is located inside the health department. We are going to move it to the parks department. It's gone back and forth over the years, and that's a change. And there's some little things. So those are the big changes that we're going to make in transfers. There's no increase in salaries. There's no increase in cost. It's just a transfer of who's in charge. So those total commitments are almost $6 million in total. So those are the things that we basically have to do. So Lila, I think one of the things I want to point out here is, the mayor, since he started, building budgets and putting his policies forward, has not wavered from his commitment to make sure that we are doing everything we can to continue to shore up and do public safety. This year's budget, the academies for police and fire are part of a continuation budget. They continue to be that way. There's been some, talk about whether or not attrition will be more or less in police and fire. Right now, they are still planning to run the academies they have. So we haven't had any changes. There's no net changes in their personnel, no additional police force, no otherwise in this one. I think to Lindy, who had APD, one of the things that they were struggling with at police was some of their non-labor. We made some small adjustments in there, but I still think that Chief Dahl is going to have some challenges. And then to Nolan, they had some questions about how we were going to help the fire department. We, in the continuation budget as a contractual obligation, one of the things that they really needed was some additional costs to shore up their contracts for physicals. We did that. But a lot of the other things that the fire department wanted to add, we were not able to accommodate, but those were the non-labor changes that we made there. In the housing and homelessness area, the housing, homelessness, and behavioral health systems that we've got in place right now, those things are going to continue. There's no changes in there. As a matter of fact, both of those things will get shored up a little bit more above the current level of service with the alcohol tax, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The mobile intervention team, that's the team that sort of runs and helps address immediate needs primarily in camps. It's a combination of the health department and APD. That's going to continue. Our contributions to nonprofits in the shelter support, that's actually going to continue as well. Support to Brother Francis, at least, we have about $200,000 in there that will continue. There's additional support for shelter contributions with the alcohol tax in support of the properties that the administration is looking to acquire. It's not all local supported. Again, there's match with private investment there. It depends on who's actually selected to be running them, then the cost will actually be determined. There was a presentation yesterday to the Assembly's Health Policy Committee about how intervention teams and could be supported as well. So that may influence we shore that process up. The other thing that I think is important to recognize is that the Parks and Rec Department currently has about $400,000 to do camp cleanup between April and October. This proposed budget will add $700,000 in alcohol tax funds to provide year-round camp cleanup and abatement service starting next year. We're keeping it inside Parks and Recreation to start, and then the long-term effect of doing that while we're shoring up these shelters and services during the daytime, supportive housing. So keeping the camp cleanup and the abatement year round is going to be an important part of that solution, but it's above and beyond what they've done before. And I think I think Carla, as you mentioned to him, his revenues, he mentioned that his revenues and services are going down. We don't know how bad or how much that's going to turn around next year. So, but for Josh, the year-round camp cleanup, it's a lot of work for them. They've been putting it together with the resources they have. We're going to add to that for 2021. And then I think on the operations continuity for all of the rest of the departments, outside just doing what we need to do to keep the CARES Act funds going, there's very little additions to the budget above and beyond. And one of those things is property appraisal is modifying their basically property appraisal system, their CAMA system. The ability and the need to keep that going and add resources. We're going to be getting to a point where you're starting next year when it gets turned on. We got to start paying the debt on the money that we borrowed to actually update that. The staffing changes. There's some training support in there to make that a reality. And then on the leases and contracts, and I meant we, instead of adding those in as additional services, we put those as continuing services. Jimmy, when he talked to Robin and real estate, he recognizes that they have an $8 million budget and 7 of it is paying leases. So there's contractual increases that go up in those things. Tasha, when she was talking to the health department, she recognizes that animal control contracts are going up. Services to the cemetery or contract services going up there. While they might not remain in the health department, they're going to go to parks. There's a lot of those lease and contract increases that went up. There was some contractual increases in the assembly for a lot of things that they're doing and relate to vote by mail. Those are not things that we can't do. Those are things that we have to do. So we provided some continuity in there. The assembly, they're toying with and trying to figure out if we're going to do a runoff election next year, whether that will be something that we need to add into 1Q or not. And then as Lindsay was talking to maintenance and operations, they got a lot going on in their world. A lot of it is debt, but I think one of the things that they're concerned about is their ability to maintain the depreciation of the fleet. We really, really struggled with a way in which we could manage this budget with the resources we had in order to shore it up. And really, this one was difficult for the administration. We are not able to give maintenance and operations additional costs to sort of close that gap on their depreciation. So as a result, we have to give them more money above their parts budget just so they can keep the aging fleet working. The solution to this is we're going to have to find a different mechanism to provide this resources to shore up the fleet. Alan Chkowski over at Maintenance and Operation has made a point that this is probably the weak link inside M&O. We're not reducing any services to plowing streets or filling potholes or maintaining the communication systems or making sure that streetlights are on and all of those things. Those things are going to continue. We also gave him some more contract work, primarily in janitorial. Street maintenance and operations is responsible for funding the janitorial contracts for all of the maintenance and all the municipal facilities, except the one we lease. That's about a $200,000 increase in janitorial. We're asking our janitorial services to do a more thorough, more repetitive work on cleaning up our facilities in times of COVID. So that does not go without a cost. So we included those additional costs inside the maintenance and operations department, but it's really necessity things, not additional service things. So, Lila, I'm going to move us along here. Without going to each one of these things, I would encourage you to, all the Budget Advisory Commission members in the Assembly, there's a lot in the budget book, but please take a look at the overview. I think it's like 15 pages in the beginning. Go to the link, go to the overview, read this piece right here. This kind of breaks down where the changes are. The property taxes, that 320,000, I want to point, 320 million, I want to point that out. That includes everybody. That includes the service area. So as the slides go forward here, I'm going to talk about the property taxes, you know, in the 5 major funds outside the service area, basically the property taxes that the administration and the Assembly directs allocation of. Obviously, they could tell the service areas in Chuyak, Eagle River, or on the hillside, or road service areas, yeah, I know that you're asking for it, but we're going to tell you that we're not giving you permission to do it. So if you live in a road service area up on the hillside and you want to adjust your assessed value so that you can plow more, or you want to do more improvements for lighting, or you want to do something else, we're not going to tell you no, but that is part of the overall increase. So property taxes, that's a big piece. Again, the sort of the pie that's between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock there, that's all those taxes that are inside the cap, and then the other revenues. So take a look at those things. You can see how those things are changing. This is literally how the money gets distributed inside our budget. You know, the amount of dollars going to personnel, it's about 56%. The number's not changing from very much from one year to the next. Supply budgets are pretty small. The travel, I will say that for supplies and travel, one of the things that the mayor did in 2020 is we reduced travel and we reduced fuel. In 2021, we put the travel budgets and the fuel budgets back in. As we get into 1Q, if the pandemic continues through 21, and we need to make adjustments because travel is not going to happen as it wasn't earlier this year, that may be a place that we, again, make an adjustment. But for now, we are not making that change. We're adding them back in. Other services, that's literally all the contract things that I talked about, lease payments, and then debt, that's debt to bonds, debt to pay off other things that we may have borrowed money for, SAP, a variety of other things, and then depreciation. This is, I think, a slide that gets some attention. Where do we spend all our money by department? As you can see, roughly continually 40% of what we spend all our money on is in public safety, and then 10% of it's in debt. And then if you kind of go down the line there, if you look to the left, everything from library to equal justice and equity and justice, it's not even, I don't even think it's 10% if I do the math, if I remember the math. So this is a picture that shows the change in personnel. So the net effect will be of 3 people. So here's sort of the money slide. What we start with when we compare our 2020 to our 2021, we look at the 2020 budget after 1Q. That is the time when we make any adjustments, we set the mill rate, we set the property tax amount. That's when it's actually set. So based on that point in time, which is in April, we compare how does the administration's proposed budget compare to that. So the budget at the end of 1Q was $542 million. The proposed budget for 2021, or rounding, it's 548 million. So that's the big change. That's the $7 million that I mentioned, the $6 million that I mentioned. Position count, you'll see that it's only going up The math says 2, so we need to change that because there's actually 3. Oh, the reason it's only 2 is one of the positions that we're adding is not a property tax position. It's a position in development services paid by the building service area. So the property taxpayers will be paying for 2 of them. One of them is in HR. It is for a classification specialist to help move classifications of personnel hiring as we're doing those kinds of changes. That's probably one of the key bottlenecks in our ability to help departments. And the other one is a new position that was added for the Department of Equity and Justice, and that was a requirement we added. So that is why there's only 2. On the property tax side, again, under the 5 major funds, when we built it in 1Q, it was 292 million. The number in the property taxes, these are the ones that the Assembly sets, that's going to go up 300 million. So that's about a 7.8%, a 7.8 million. It's roughly a 2.7% adjustment. So it's about $28 to $29 per 100,000, and that's so that would equate to roughly $100,000 increase to the average home. And again, since many things inside the tax cap, netted down, the property taxes have to make up that difference inside the tax cap. So we also, when we do the tax cap calculation, we account for if we have more voter approved bond debt, then we have to adjust that in there. If population and CPI cause the tax cap to go up because of the calculation, we make that adjustment, but this is literally the net effect. So this is for general government. I'll remind you, this does not include the school district. Okay, Lila. So I think what I'd like to do is maybe I'll go through the capital budget and then utilities, and then hopefully we have a little bit of time for questions, so and maybe some feedback. The next part is so the capital budget for 2021, this is just the bonds. It doesn't include any of the federal dollars. There's very small state amount of money, and there's some other sums. So for the fire department, this would include ambulances and fire trucks. That's about $2.5 million. The library has a project where they want to improve the Alaska room. Maintenance and operations, this would be an area-wide service except for Girdwood. So inside maintenance and operations, it will be about $12 million. It includes improvements to our communication systems for public safety. It includes a little bit of money for the senior centers. Inside that 12 million is 2.1 for Girdwood. This is a very similar project that was on the ballot last year for Girdwood. It passed in Girdwood, but it failed in Anchorage. And what that means is that Girdwood wants to make some improvements to a facility they have down there for it's called Glacier Valley, I think Glacier Valley City Hall, Little Bears facility. They want to make some improvements down there. They would put a bond out. They would pay the debt. Anchorage residents would not, unless you own property in Girdwood. But Anchorage residents have to also pass that because it's the full faith and credit. So there's some work to be done from the Girdwood community to put that on there, but that's part of the $56 million. Parks and Rec looks pretty much the same. Public transportation, this is about a 7-to-1 match for transit, and then roads and traffic would be $35 million. So for a total net package of about $56 million. The average over the last 5 years has been roughly $50 million. Last year we had a $60 million, $62 million package, but again, $2 million of that did not pass. So the bond package for next year is pretty much meat and potatoes. There's really no brand new links or brand new parks. It's really sort of maintaining the infrastructure and the services that we have today. Anyway, again, the overview and the capital budget will give you a rundown of that. I'll be briefing the Planning and Zoning Commission a little bit more detail in November. But if you're interested in those projects, let me know. And then I do want to talk a little bit about the alcohol tax before I go to the utilities. On the alcohol tax, you will not see and when you look at the health department or the parks department or treasury, you will not see the alcohol tax blended inside each one of those individually. And we're interested in feedback from you and from the assembly because we're trying to decide how to illustrate this. What we decided to do was, I'm going to ask Lila to go to, well, actually, before I do that, we illustrated a little bit differently, and I'll show you how we did that. But to remind everyone, the alcohol tax cannot be spent anywhere. It can't be spent on things that we've already done in 2020. It can't be spent in the planning department. It can't be spent in OMB. It can't be spent on things that are not alcohol tax related that were specifically approved by the voters. We can't spend them to open a fire station. We can't spend them to basically, pay an additional lease payment. We can't buy planners or development reviewers. The only thing we can do with it is there has to be a direct link to a services provided that are related to addressing child abuse or sexual assault or domestic violence, homelessness, mental health, substance abuse. We are going to spend some money that will allow us to administer the tax. The one thing that's not on here, and maybe we should add it, actually I think I will add it, is we can add it for public safety and first responders to the alcohol tax. Right now, the projection is we're going to get about $12 million in alcohol tax in 2021. The administration is only proposing to allocate about 9 million of that. We will likely make some adjustments. So Lila, can I ask you to go to the Appendix R? So I'm going to ask Lila to bring up a page in the budget book. So in the budget book, the way in which we're illustrating the alcohol tax is in an appendix. This may or may not be the best way to do it, and obviously we have changes to do it. So what we've tried to do here is explain to the assembly and to residents what we can actually spend the money on and why. So the next slide, Lila, the next page. The next page in Appendix R. Here is what we've done. This looks like a page you will see for any department. So this is a summary of where we wanted to spend the alcohol tax. So I'm not going to go to each one of these things. Suffice it to say that a lot of these things have been discussed either at Assembly Public Safety Committee work sessions or health. About 8 million of the 9 is going into the health department. Roughly 500,000 of it is going to go help the homeless inside positions to support activities. I'm going to ask Lila to roll down a little bit. We've got about 4 million that's going to go outside of the city to individuals or services that are going to support early education, evidence-based grants to provider to support things related to addressing mental health or substance abuse related to the alcohol tax, and then roughly about $2 million for operations of the shelters, because those will be services that we don't currently provide that will be above and beyond. So this is where the administration is planning to apply the alcohol tax. We're going to spend a lot of time with the assembly in future work sessions, but I wanted to share with them in the overview, this is where it's going to go. Lila, if I could go back to the original presentation. So that's what we're doing with the alcohol tax. Utilities and enterprise. So we have 5 departments. I think there's 2 big points I want to make here. The utility and enterprise departments, obviously we will no longer have municipal light and power as a utility that we are responsible for. But what we will have is we will have a new utility called Anchorage Hydro. As the result of the sale of MLMP through the transactions, we have a power generation plant in Cluton. And as part of the agreement through the sale, that power plant will be managed and operated by the municipality, Chugach Electric, and MEA. So we do have the ability or responsibility through the RCA documents that we put together that we have this new utility called Anchorage Hydropower. So we've included that into our budget. There's no rate adjustments in there. Frankly, the revenues that come off of that from the sale of the power to Chugach and to MEA, I believe the Chugach dollars have to come back in to support either into the trust or into operating the utility. The proceeds of the sale of power from MEA can be used for anything inside support of general government, including the support of hydropower. I think AWU is the story in the utilities. AWU, I think for the first time, is actually reducing their budget. The utility is in a revenue struggle like general government. There are individuals, for two reasons. One, people are not using as much water and sewer. There's a different distribution, obviously, less on the commercial side and more on the residential side, but the net is they're losing revenue from less use, less demand, but also other individuals struggling to pay their utility bills. So the result of that is they needed to buckle down and make sure that they are keeping themselves in a strong financial position to make sure they have enough cash on hand to cover any of their debt in the event that those revenues continue to not show up. As a result of that, in the past, AWU has provided general government a dividend. But when you do the math now, they're not going to be providing us a dividend. Earlier in the year, we would have anticipated a $1.6 million increase revenue from them. It's not going to happen. They do have a proposal, and it's going to the RCA for a 2% rate increase in their water and an 8% increase in their wastewater. They have infrastructure improvements they still have to maintain. They have work to make sure that their wastewater treatment facility out in Point Wernzoff, continues to meet permit standards and EPA requirements. So their capital budget's pretty minimal this year, but overall, their overall budget is a little bit less than it was last year, even though they're not paying us a dividend and they do have some rate increases. Merrill Field, really no changes there. For many of you who might not know, Merrill Field got $18 million in federal FAA money. They're applying it to their capital. That is where all of that money is going. They're not asking for anything more. They're basically really in good shape right now. No changes in their staff. They don't have any debt, so they're in really good shape.
Hey, Lance, to hop in here, I am gonna have a hard stop
Okay.
at 1 o'clock, and so I wanted to see if we had if there's any chance we could maybe take a few comments or questions and it's before we have to adjourn.
I'll be glad to. This is really kind of the last slide, as the utilities are doing good. So again, that took about 45 minutes. So I don't know how long it took, but yes, thank you, Nolan.
And thanks, Lance. And I think it's a pretty thorough presentation. I think a lot of important stuff to cover. Do folks have questions or comments for Lance on the 2021 budget?
I ask, is it too slow? Is it too fast? Is it too much? Is it not enough?
I would offer, Lance, there's a slide that you've got that shows the budget compared to compared to Q1 of 2020 versus 2021, and then you show the overall amounts. That one. I think it might help to have that one early on.
Okay.
To frame the big picture stuff before getting to it. I think that might be That's pretty clarifying. That's one thought.
Thank you, Nolan.
In the chat, let's see. Alyssa says, I always want more detail, but I think it would be too long if you added more detail, right? So, but it does need to have there's a good amount of detail that it needs to have no matter what, right? I think that's certainly something.
What I should mention is the purpose is just an overview. The detail is on the 16th and the 23rd, and I go into a lot more detail in every department, in every category, including revenues. This is just to give them a taste of what we got.
Sure. So I am gonna have to hop off like pronto, and I apologize for that. But but let's see. Our next meeting is going to be on November 5th, I believe, and we may need to talk about some work sessions around the 2021 budget. So I think that might be something we're gonna have to work out by email. Because I'm gonna have to run. Is there an emotion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is there a second?
This is Lindsay, second.
Okay, and I'm sorry to go, but thanks everybody. And thank you, Lance. I appreciate the update on the budget, and we'll resume business soon. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nolan, and others. Hey, other committee members, if you do have some thoughts on this, please let me know. And because my plan is with your edits, I can true this up and get it to Desiree to give to the assembly, and then I can get it to you. Really, it's important to try to true it up. So if you have some thoughts, that'd be great. And thanks for your patience.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Lance.